Hello, I'm Gail Persicelli, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today's ILTA webinar, Navigate Through SharePoint Upgrades and Migration Viability. Our speakers today are Ted Theodoropoulos, the founder and president of AccuWire, and Brian Goff, AccuWire's solutions architect. I would like to thank AccuWire for hosting this webinar. Their sponsorship is vital in keeping the ILTA webinars free to our members. Today's presentation will run about 45 to 60 minutes. Please submit all questions to the Q&A box, and if those are not answered during the presentation, they will be addressed at the end. Before we start, please know that we are recording today's webinar and will post a link to our website under recordings shortly after today's presentation. I'll now turn over the webinar to Ted.
Thank you, Gail. So welcome to Navigating Through SharePoint Upgrades and Migrations. And with every major release of SharePoint, there's a lot to talk about with respect to new features and capabilities of the platform. And SharePoint 2016 is 3 years in the making, just released to market about a month and a half ago. So it's still very new, and we're still working through our first set of production upgrades. So we're learning a lot. And there's a lot to talk about. What we're going to discuss today is Brian and I are going to introduce ourselves in a little more detail. We're going to define what upgrade and what migration mean. They're two very different things. We're going to talk about why upgrading or migrating to the latest version of SharePoint could be potentially critical for your firm. And then we're going to talk about upgrade and migration options, some things to consider, and then we're going to talk about communications and testing. So I'm Ted Theodoropoulos. I'm the founder and president of AccuWire. I've been in the IT business for a long time. I spent 10 years at Bank of America in IT audit and risk management roles. Prior to that, I was on the SQL team at Microsoft for some time. I'm also a certified Scrum Master and Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. And I'll let Brian introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Brian Goff here. So I am one of AccuWire solutions architects with a focus on SharePoint technologies. I've been working with the Microsoft technologies for also a good number of years. The past decade or so has been focused on the SharePoint product. I started out as a developer and then slowly morphed into becoming more in the SharePoint administration and installs space. Twice recognized as a SharePoint MVP, doing a number of SharePoint Saturdays, a lot of road shows and discussions and conferences and blogging. So thank you everybody for attending. Hopefully you'll get a lot out of this and know how to start moving forward with your next version of SharePoint.
And I wanted to take just a minute or two here to tell folks on the phone a little bit about AccuWire and what we do. So AccuWire is an IT consulting firm. We do probably more SharePoint services work in legal than anybody else. And we have 3 areas of focus primarily. SharePoint, obviously intranet, extranet scenarios within law firms those are very popular use cases. And we do pretty much everything SharePoint, from custom development of SharePoint, what are now called add-ins, used to be web parts, portal branding and user experience, so making the look and feel of your intranet or extranet reflect the brand that your firm has established. Migration, which we're going to talk a lot about today. We also provide managed services around SharePoint. So if you want to manage SharePoint without a SharePoint team and have us perform maintenance tasks and provide end user or administrative support, we offer that. On the application development side, everything that you see there is primarily around the Microsoft development stack. So we do standalone app dev. It has nothing to do with SharePoint. SharePoint and app dev are big parts of our business. And then kind of as a feeder into those two practice areas is something that we call envisioning. And envisioning is a really good place for firms to start when evaluating what their next portal experience is going to look like. So envisioning involves helping the firm crystallize what the business case is for the initiative, helping extract requirements from the relevant stakeholders' heads and formulating those into user stories. And then we have what's called an envisioning toolkit. So we have wireframes that map out pretty much every scenario that a legal intranet or extranet would want to accommodate. And we put all of that together into a project plan with a reliable cost estimate. So that's AcroWire. Before we get started, we want to take a quick poll, and I think Gail is going to jump in. The question is, what version of SharePoint are you moving to next? And my guess would be that it's going to be a lot of SharePoint 2013, very few, if any, SharePoint 2010. But we're interested, especially in folks, whether or not they're going to SharePoint Online. So, SharePoint Online, and if you're going to go hybrid, select SharePoint Online, just so that we can capture that. Okay, so SharePoint 2016, excellent. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier in the call, the RTM, which is the release to market, is just about 6 weeks old. And one thing that's a little different about SharePoint 2016 is that it's derived from the SharePoint Online code base. And what that means is a lot of those features have been vetted in the cloud. So the release feels more fully baked than your typical, not just SharePoint, but any Microsoft product before SP1. Sometimes there can be a little bit of flakiness, or you can tell that things aren't quite as polished as they you may hope they would have been. With SharePoint 2016, our initial reaction is that it feels a little different. So the fact that more firms are moving there is encouraging, because I think that's really the right move. And I'm going to turn it over here to Brian to carry us through most of the presentation and talk about upgrade versus migration.
All right, thank you very much, Ted. So to start off, we want to make sure that we cover, upgrade versus migration. What is the difference between the two, so that we don't have to constantly say upgrade or migration, and just to help shorten it up for us a little bit. So for the purpose primarily of this presentation, upgrade, when we reference doing the upgrade, is using the out-of-the-box capability from SharePoint, like your database attach, detach process, or in the earlier versions, you might have been able to do an in-place upgrade or gradual upgrade. So whenever we reference upgrade, we're talking just, what is provided out of the box from SharePoint to Microsoft. If we are referencing migration, talking about migration, then we're referring to some third-party tool. There's a variety of third-party tools out there, but they will allow you to move data from one version to another. And we will discuss, some of the different pros and cons for each of the different methods as well as we go forward. But just wanted to make sure we had that definition taken care of first, let folks know upgrade versus migration for the purpose of our demonstration. Okay, so why upgrading now could be very critical to your success. So depending on what your current version of SharePoint is, right? So SharePoint 2010, for instance, may no longer be supported, depending on what your EA is, what you have set up, but the mainstream support for 2010 ended on October of 2015. So trying to get continued support, may now be a bit more costly. The earlier versions definitely are no longer supported. So if you're on SharePoint 2003 or 2007, then you're definitely probably going to be paying a premium to get any kind of support from Microsoft for any problems or issues that you might be having. Also, the big ones are to take advantage of some of the new features, right? So as SharePoint continues to grow and mature as a product, it's definitely offering more and more capabilities to help you and your business. Streamlining your business processes and just helping the users conduct the job that they need to do and keep the information flowing as easily as possible, as well as providing more access. So the changes to mobile have been, a number of improvements. I believe they just recently released the mobile app for iOS operating system. So for your Apple phones, you can now get a SharePoint mobile app for SharePoint 2016. So a number of these different features that keep coming out, some of them are impacting your end users. Others are some benefits for the administrators, the back-end folks, like I mentioned, MinRoles here. How are we making sure that the hardware that we're running SharePoint on is running more efficient and better for us? So keeping an eye on these different options and features that are out here. These are just a few of some of the changes, and depending on what version you're moving to, obviously there's different features or benefits.
Hey, and Brian, I wanted to jump in on this slide and just talk about some things that I think are really exciting from a law firm perspective with 2016. So and this is partially true with 2013 as well. So hybrid cloud search is a great way for firms to reduce their data center footprint that's required from an infrastructure perspective to support SharePoint. So if, and the firm obviously has to be not completely averse to the cloud, and we're seeing more firms soften their stance on this. But with 2013 or 2016, you can deploy a search service application behind your firewall that will allow SharePoint to crawl your on-prem repositories like your DM, file shares, SQL databases, your financial package, and then index that information online. And for folks who have that you search for SharePoint search as their enterprise search solution to provide that single pane of glass, this is a huge deal. So, we've seen scenarios where firms have gone from 4 search servers down to 1 because that resource intensive workload has just been pushed into Microsoft's data center. And now you've got coalesced search results. So a lot of benefit there. And then Brian talked about on the mobile front, the native app is extremely cool. It's only been out, I think, less than a week in the App Store for iOS. But just fooling around with that, if you were in a cloud scenario, you'd have access to Office 365 video, which I know firms have expressed interest in. And then MinRoles, even though that's very much a administrator type of enhancement, the reality is that deploying your farm using MinRoles is going to create additional stability and improve performance, and that's going to benefit everyone, including your end users. So there's a real business case to be made here for why you don't want to be that guy catching the bus. And if you have any questions about, you're trying to make a case with management as to why you might want to go to 2016, give us a call. We'd be glad to talk to you free of charge to outline some of the ways you might be able to make a solid business case.
Excellent. Thank you, Ted. All right, so let's look at some of the options for upgrading. So again, these are the upgrades that's available with the out of the box. When using upgrades from SharePoint, you basically can only upgrade from your current version plus 1. Okay, so you can go from 2003 to 2007, but you can't just make one jump from 2003 to 2010. Okay. If you are moving from 2003 to 2007, you had several different options that you could choose from. You had a gradual upgrade process, the database attach process, or an in-place upgrade. I personally have never been a fan of in-place upgrade. So if that's one that you're looking at and thinking of, please make sure you do a lot of planning and thinking about it. Make sure you've got full backups of your farm, because basically that is just you're upgrading and wiping out what your current farm is. Nothing else to go back to if you don't have proper backups in place. So as the product grew and matured, when you wanted to go from 2007 to 2010, they removed the gradual upgrade option. So then you just had the 2, database attach or an in-place upgrade, going from 2007 to 2010. Moving on, you now have, if you were going to go from 2010 to 2013, or if you want to go from 2013 to 2016, your only option is the database attach. So what does that mean? Largely, it means you're going to have another farm stood up and ready to go, right? You're not going to be able to do the in-place upgrades or anything. So you're going to have your 2010 or your 2013 farm. Then you have to have the hardware stood up, create your farm, get everything in place for 2016, then do the database attach and move your content databases and or some of your application services databases. Those would have to go through the process to move and upgrade, then upgrading the sites, again, depending on what you do for, if you're going to 2016, one of the changes there, when you actually upgrade the databases, it's automatically also going to update and upgrade your site collections for you. In the previous version, when you're moving to 2010 or 2013, there were some options where you could upgrade the site collections independently. So once the database itself was attached and upgraded, there were extra commands, or you could let your site owners decide when did they want to then say, okay, I now want this UI to be upgraded and start leveraging the new capabilities in 2013 or 2016. But 2016, once you attach it and upgrade the database, all your site collections are also automatically updated. So you don't have that additional step to take to get all your site collections and your sites set up for it. So again, keep in mind when doing the upgrade, it's going only from one version. So if you're a few versions back, you probably are going to want to look at using migration tools to help you with that process. Excuse me. So for your migrations, said if you want to jump ahead more than one version, you're going to be looking at third-party tools. So a few of the main players, I know there are several other tools out there. You'll have to investigate to see which tools are really going to meet your needs for, as far as the features, the process, how it works, as well as price, what's going to be the cost. I am more familiar with the ShareGate tool. That's one we've used successfully on many different engagements. But Metalogix and AvePoint, not to take anything away from them, have been big players in the industry for a good number of years. So they also have very solid products. But definitely take a look. The price points between each of these is very different. And as well as some of the different capabilities. If you need some additional help with reporting, monitoring, governance, each of these tools has their own little flavor on how they do it and what they do. If you're moving to SharePoint Online, one of the things we wanted to make sure we brought to your attention is drive shipping. So typically this is going to be for the much larger databases. So if you have, say, 10 terabytes of data or more, then you're probably going to want to look at using the drive shipping. That's going to be much faster for you, okay? One of the other pieces to keep in mind between your migration, right, using one of these third-party products versus a database attach method, when using these migration tools, the way they're going to be moving your data is by leveraging the CSOM or the API, the behind-the-scenes code, to actually move your content. And you can control, am I moving at the site level or the database level, et cetera, right, and get your content over. But because they are going to be inserting these, an item at a time, if you will, right, because they only have certain, APIs and certain methods available to them, it's going to be a slower process. Okay, if you are doing the database attach, it's a matter of how long does it take to back up the database, restore them, and run the commands. It's definitely going to be a lot faster. But you're doing what we call a lift and shift, right? You're not moving anything around. You're not adjusting the different site collections, your databases. That's as they are. That's what you're going to move over, and you're going to get that in your new environment. And if you wanted to do any kind of rearranging, then you'd have to do that after that point. But if you want to do it as part of your migration, as part of moving to your new version, then a third-party tool can probably help you. Just keep in mind that it's going to be a bit of a slower process using these tools. How slow? It's all going to depend on what you've got, what kind of customizations, and which tool you're using. They all have their own little idiosyncrasies and different ways that they're going to handle everything. We have the link for the drive shipping, so to get some more information, so if that is something that you want to look into. So there's definitely, if you're moving to Office 365 in the space, then I think the cost is around like $2 to US dollars per gigabyte. And there are some other caveats and things that you need to do to prep that drive, but it can definitely be a very compelling option. So we want to make sure you're aware of it. Keep that in mind. So some considerations before your upgrade or migration. So anytime you're making a big shift like this, that's definitely, you know, a logical time to really look at your world. What do you have for the sites? Or do you have a number of sites out there that just aren't being used anymore, right? Delete those, get rid of that. You know, it's always the best policy is don't move your junk, right? Don't take your trash from one area and keep your trash in the new spot. If you don't need it, get rid of it. Don't bother counting that as content that you're going to bring across. Look at the size of your databases. Are the content databases getting too large, right? The best practice is that you want to keep them, you know, under 250 gigabytes. So if it does look like they're getting a little large, where do you want to start moving things around? Do you want to start chopping up some of your site collections, create some new content databases, move and reassign information, get that taken care of? This is a perfect time to take care of that. You're going to have some kind of, you know, some level of an interruption in a change for your end users. So let's get as much done as we can so that we can minimize how many times we interrupt our users, right? Definitely want to start taking a look at your list. How many lists have you had? What kind of content is contained in them? How large are they? And your permissions. I know for a fact permissions are, you know, can be a real headache for a lot of people. And if you have a site that's been around for many, many years, you know, with the employee turnover, changes in jobs, maybe even, you know, changes internally, you know, what is your department structure like now? So all these are things that may have an impact depending on how you set your permissions up. So you might really want to do a good thorough audit of all this different content, sites, databases, your lists, your permissions. Take a look at all this information and use this in consideration for planning what you're going to move and how. A lot of this can help dictate, is an upgrade the better solution for you, or because of the changes and adjustments you might need to make, maybe a migration using a third-party tool, that could be a better solution for you. So doing this inventory and audit can definitely help point you in one direction or another. So when planning your upgrade, so definitely I think most of us have heard the failing to plan is planning to fail. And it's definitely very true when you're trying to plan your upgrade and what you're going to move. The impact to your end users, as well as, you know, just the staff, the IT department, whoever's going to actually be performing all the work, it's a big impact. So you want to make sure you take time to plan it, streamline what you're going to need to do, make sure you understand what the timeline's going to be, how long does it take to get everything done, what your downtime will be, how are you going to have all this, get it planned out. From the inventory that hopefully you've done, right? You've now looked at all your lists and sites and what the sizing, and you're starting to look at what you need to move. Are you planning on moving any of your service application databases? You don't necessarily have to migrate those. You might choose to. I know it's been a mix. You know, we've seen some where they might have a couple of, some customizations done in search. They might need to move some of the search databases to make sure they keep some of their managed properties, the custom managed properties that they might have created. Other places, they just, nope, they stood up the new farm and they've got everything in place. All they want are the content databases. All perfectly viable, but plan that. Take a look at these. What do you need to do? When you're doing the upgrade, how long does it take for you to make a backup or a copy of the content databases you're going to move? If you're moving them to a new instance or a different piece of hardware, how long will it take to then move that to that hardware? Then how long does it take to actually restore that or get that database that you've copied into the new database where you want that to have? So all this is timing that impacts what your downtime is going to be, what the impact. And these are all potential pain points, right? So planning this, making sure you've got each and every step mapped out on what you've done, and go ahead and test it, right? And once you have moved it, do a test. Fully plan and intend to do a test upgrade. Grab a copy of the database, get that into your new farm, upgrade it, and get some end users and everybody to get out there and play with it and look at it. So now your existing farm is up and running, it's available, your business is still running, everything's working fine, but you've got your new farm. have some people look at it and test everything. What are some of your, special sites, if you will? Who are some sites of greater concern that you might want to, make sure people spend some extra time? And what is your test plan, right? What kind of scenarios do you want to test? What do you want to check out to make sure it works? Anything with Excel services, rendering your Word documents in the browser or not. Identifying who is involved, who will be taking place in doing the testing, who is going to be the individual in your database or your IT team that's going to make the copies of the database and move them. Do you have enough space on the servers for moving all these content databases, right? How about the auto growth settings? What's going to happen when you add all this new content to your new SQL server? As you start moving this, having those databases already sized for you can really save you some time for adding the content and restoring those databases. So making sure you've communicated and got that information out to the end users and plan all the different facets for this will definitely go a long way in making sure that you keep your sanity, but it's also keeping your community involved, your end users. So the more involved they are in this process, the better chances are that you're going to have a good reception for moving to the new to your new environment. So planning with the migration, again, it's still planning, but because of it being a migration, things can be quite different. Okay, there's a lot more flexibility when migrating. You can also go from one version to another. If you want to copy, most of the tools, I know for sure that the ShareGate tool does this, and I'm pretty sure the Metalogix and NavPoint gives you the same capability, but you can jump from 2010 right to 2016. Okay, because it's copying the content. And because it is at that content level, you have a lot more flexibility. Do you want to move, one site collection at a time? So you can kind of think of it as, a flavor, if you will, of the old gradual migration. So what department or what site collection do you want to move to the new version? Maybe you're going to move your HR department first, and then or maybe your IT department, right? Everybody likes to use the IT guys as the guinea pigs. So move the IT guys and let them see the new world, see if there's any problems or issues that might come up, and then start looking at some of the other site collections, if it is more department, business level kind of hierarchy. But what content do you want to move? Because it's the migration tool and at the content level, it's a little bit easier to move content to a different location. So did you want to take some content that's in some subsite and move it to an entirely different subsite under a different hierarchy? If you've changed your information architecture, the migration tool can be a big help to let you move and rearrange your content, right? So keeping that in mind as far as how are you going to migrate? Doing that testing, get that migration, do a couple of tests, especially if you have what you think might be problem sites. Again, those special sites, get those moved and migrate. Just like the upgrade, who's involved? Who is going to be the testing? What are they going to test? Have you created that test plan for them? How are they communicating what works and doesn't work, right? So, just because they're out there testing, say, well, none of this works. Okay, are they capturing screenshots? Have you set something up to give them the information? How are they going to communicate this to you so that you can keep track of, and so that, yes, I addressed each of these issues and how you're going to address and take care of it for any additional sites or site collections that may have, potentially similar problems. So again, what end users, keeping them involved, keeping them, they need to plan their time. They have a day-to-day job just like you do, right? So having this migration and them testing the migration, that's above and beyond their normal job. So keeping them involved and who's going to be there helps them plan for their days and whatever other projects they might be working on, all right? And remember, adjusting the plan is okay. Well, that's why we test. Identify where the issues are, what potential problems are, what the timing is. Then you can adjust your plan to, allow for things. And that way, once it comes time for the final push, you should be, considerably more accurate at that point, right? Excuse me. So I've mentioned it a couple of times in the other slides, but communications. There's no such thing as communicating too much, especially on a project of this magnitude. You're about to do something that's going to impact your entire enterprise and quite possibly external users. If you have extranet sites for some of your vendors or clients externally, it's going to have a big impact on them as well. right? Are the URLs changing that they've been working with? What is the layout of the content? Did you change the information architecture? So the communications, let people know that you're thinking about doing this upgrade. Let them know the upgrade is coming up in a few months from now or 6 months from now. Let them know that you are doing some more changes and why. What are going to be the benefits, to making this change for them? What's going to make their lives easier? What's going to happen with them? How is this going to be done? Get the date, set the expectations, start working with them to, work out, okay, who will be the individuals from each of these teams or departments that are going to help you with your testing. So you can then start working with them for the test plans. Making sure they're aware of it is going to help the adoption in the long run, right? It's to hit somebody with something this large, without telling them, that's when people get defensive, right? Human beings are defensive by nature. So to throw a big change like that at them will definitely give them, a bad feeling about it all. But if you communicate with them, talk to them, send them emails, sample screenshots, whatever you can find. Hey, have this. Do quick little lunch and learns or some little conferences or something, right? Anything like that to make sure that they're involved, make them feel involved, get their feedback, get their questions, and be responsive to those questions, right? That is all going to go a long, long way to making them feel more included and embrace this change for them quite a bit more. So communicate, communicate, communicate. Make sure everybody knows from the top down. Don't forget your external users. It's real easy to, everybody has the, like, I'm just going to send this to everyone or to, my company, but they forget we also need to communicate to our extranet users. Who are the external people that we also need to make sure we include them? Maybe not to the same extent as your internal folks, but you definitely need to be communicating. Let them know what the impact is, the dates, what your timelines are, keep everything going on with them.
Hey, and Brian, just to add to that, and also communicating, as part of that communication plan, helping folks understand what the objectives are. So, change just for the sake of change is not, end users may not see, especially attorneys whose time is very valuable and they have a limited amount of it and have a lot of pressures for their time. Change for the sake of change that end up creating a needed investment of time from timekeepers is a challenge. So helping folks understand what the objectives of the migration are. In a scenario in like 2016, there's not a significant amount of UI new capabilities or new features. There are some, but if you look in the past, 2003 to 07 or 07 to 2010, 2010 to 2013, you saw massive shifts in user experience. That's not the case in 2016. So, if a user has to put up with, let's say, downtime, or you're going to rebrand which we see this a lot as part of the migration, especially if you're coming from 2010, you're probably going to need to rebrand the site. So the branding packages that you have deployed in 2010 are probably not going to work without some tweaking at a minimum, potentially even complete rewrites in 2013 or 2016. It's just the nature of how SharePoint works from a UI perspective. So that means that there's going to be time invested from your end users. They need to know why. And that's going to soften the blow, so to speak. And so communication is critical, and having folks understand what the objectives are will also help them get acclimated.
Excellent. Yep, and very true. I still remember the uproar when they introduced the ribbon in SharePoint 2010. That was such an, everybody's like, whoa, what is this? How do I do everything? Where is it all gone? Making sure folks are aware of what's going to change and why, and hopefully they can over time understand the benefits of how that's going to get more of the menu options and things available to them. But as Ted mentioned, the change between 2013 to 2016, not that big a deal. If you're going from earlier versions, 2007, and moving up to any version newer than that, 2010 forward, there's some big UI changes. So even where did they move your site actions menu? Is it on the left or the right? They've gone back and forth with that a couple of times. So just where are my options? Where are my menus for doing things? Some folks, that could be a big deal, just moving a menu from one side of the screen to another. So definitely keep them aware.
Yeah, you know, and with 50% of the folks that responded to the survey moving to 2016, something else that you may want to include as part of your communication plan is expectations around future updates. So if you're in SharePoint Online, you've seen the new drastically different document library user interface. There are user enhancements that impact the interface. That if Microsoft holds true to their word, and I believe they will, these are going to be frequent incremental upgrades that Microsoft's going to release as part of 2016. They have to because of SharePoint Online. They can't let there be too far of a gap between what's in SharePoint Server and what's in SharePoint Online. So, you know, you need to kind of set expectations with users when you go to the 2016 platform. It's not going to be like it was in the past, you know, where you get a service pack every so often, and a cumulative update and a hot fix here and there, you know, a couple of times a year at best. This is going to be more frequent. Again, if Microsoft lives up to its promise, which I think they kind of have to, you may want to, you know, tell users to expect change more frequently than they have in the past, unless ultimately you have control when you're on-prem. So, you know, you can choose not to deploy updates, but there's always a downside to that. So administrators should expect to get much more frequent updates from Microsoft in 2016 than they have in previous versions of the product.
Excellent. So testing, definitely. It sounds almost like a no-brainer, but you really do need to test and make sure everything is rolling, and you know what have you tested. Make sure the process to copy the databases and move the databases. This will bring out some of the areas like, oh, well, I guess we did run out of space. We need to make sure we've got room for this. When are you doing the copies and restores? Is it at the same time that you are doing backups in your system? So this testing can, you know, it really helps bring some of this to light. You know, it's, unless you've done this a lot and you've got a very thorough checklist of, you know, what to look at and when, these little things can give you a hiccup. You know, say, you know, that one scenario as far as running, you know, backups running on a system at the same time, that can eat up a lot of the resources. And maybe a backup process of, you know, while you're trying to do your restores and backups are running, that could have an impact as far as how long it takes to do your restores, and you know that changes your time frame, and oh, now you're going to be late. So keeping that kind of information in mind and keep an eye on everything, testing will really help that. Making sure you've got, you know, a test plan in place. You know, if you're going to be, you know, interrupting your end users' lives and their day-to-day project and their work, you know, asking them for tests, make sure you give them some kind of a test plan. Please do this, upload these kinds of documents and download these kinds of documents, do the changes. Do you try and leverage the co-authoring? Check, make sure co-authoring is working and running. You know, depending on the version that you're moving to, if you need to leverage Office web apps, you know, do you need to make sure that you can display your Word documents in the browser? Make that part of the test plan and what you're communicating. Make sure everybody's checked that box and looked at what they need to do. Plan time in your project for multiple tests. Allow for a couple different downtimes, allow for the issues, give yourself some buffer, what's going to happen, and make sure you keep whoever's in charge of your communication plan, keep them appraised of what's going on. If you have to change any timelines because of the testing, what did this testing prove out for you? Are there some other changes or adjustments that you might need to make? All of this is what will help when you do that test. So test it again, and test it again if you need to, just to make sure. You'll definitely, you go a long way by being able to communicate to your end users, your enterprise, to say, on this day, we're going to make the change and roll this out. And they've got confidence in you, and you do it. Not have that day show up or the night before and say, oh, well, no, we're going to have to wait and change. If you do that a few times, and your community is going to start to lose faith in you. right? So take the time, do your testing, get everything documented, mapped out, communicate. Keep your end users, keep your enterprise involved in what you're going to do, okay? That will go a long way to help you with your adoption.
Hey, and Brian, I was just going to add another a little bit of commentary to this as well. And having a formal QA checklist, and when I say formal, I mean, you know, something that's structured. It doesn't have to be overly fancy or complicated, but having a structured QA checklist is key, with pass-fail on each of the line items with clear criteria as to what indicates a failure and what indicates a pass. Is for a production environment, especially of any scale, is key. And we've built a lot of QA checklists like that on a custom basis, but there are some templates out there. I've seen checklists, migration checklists from especially the vendors that provide some of the tools. You know, ShareGate, MetaLogix, and AvePoint. There are others. Quest as well has some content out there. There are some checklists that you can use as a starting point, so you're not just kind of starting from scratch. But you know, do some simulations, go through the checklist, make sure you have an adequate number of whatever your requisite, wherever you draw the line in terms of pass QA tests, and have some clear criteria on what you need to achieve in order to move forward and pull the trigger. Because if you leave it up to your administrators, you know, and say, hey, when things look good, pull the trigger, what looks good to you may not look good to me. And having some quantitative way to evaluate the state of the migration is very important. So I would look and see what's out there, and if you want some help or some guidance in finding these sort of checklists, reach out to us and we'll be glad to point you in that direction.
Most definitely. Yep. Okay. So we've tried to give you a lot of things to think about. So, you know, as far as upgrade, what you can do, is it the migration, when to use one over the other. So hopefully, you know, we've given you a few things to think about, maybe brought some things to your attention you didn't consider before to help you with planning your migration and what's available. So hopefully we found this of benefit. If there's any questions, don't forget the Q&A panel. So if you want to fill in any questions that you might have that we can take care of for you, now's the time. Go ahead and fill those in. Don't know, is there anything else, Ted, that you wanted to cover?
No, not at this point. I think while we're waiting for questions to filter in, you know, I just kind of want to hammer home the point that there is help. Whether you use AcroWire or another vendor, I think that if this is your first go round in a major migration, even if it's not, that each version of SharePoint comes with its unique challenges. The reality is that even in the consulting world, there haven't been a lot of production migrations with 2016 yet. However, they're going to be the first ones to experience the pain and have inside tracks with the vendors who provide these tools, which is where these hangups are likely to occur. So, you know, it may be worthwhile to evaluate bringing in some help. It looks like we have a couple of questions pouring in here. So let's see. Curious how many people are thinking about hybrid 2016 upgrade and what extra steps need to be made and configured. Wow. Okay, that's a broad question. So hybrid, there's a number of different ways to go down the hybrid path. So hybrid simply means that you have some assets on-prem and some online. If you're going hybrid search, it's a pretty straightforward topology. And you know, you deploy a search service application. Microsoft manages a lot of the complexity on how to wire up the SSA that's on-prem with SharePoint Online. There are other hybrid configurations that you can deploy. So maybe you want to put your My Sites in SharePoint Online rather than on-prem, or you want to leverage OneDrive, or there's just so many different topologies that you can implement in hybrid that it's difficult to say. I would say that the most popular one that we're seeing in legal, and this is really kind of brand new, like we're just seeing the first big firms start to go down this path, is hybrid search. Because again, the ROI is the highest there, because they can immediately eliminate servers for purposes of supporting their search infrastructure. That's what we're seeing initially. We've also seen where they're using SharePoint Online, firms are using SharePoint Online site collections for extranet purposes. So rather than standing up a new web front end in your DMZ for purposes of an extranet, which is best practices with SharePoint, you can set up a hybrid scenario where you have clients interact with SharePoint Online as part of that extranet configuration. So those are the two biggest use cases: hybrid search and extranet that we're seeing in legal today. There's still a long way to go. Most of the vendors that provide SharePoint add-ins and frameworks that we see in legal that are common aren't Office 365 full. They're not fully baked. So if you decide to go down that road, make sure that you see some demos from the vendors and have some references where people have made this work. Because we've had a few clients that bought into the marketing message, and then once they got deployed, realized that there were major workarounds or pieces of functionality that just didn't work in a hybrid configuration.
Right.
You want to take the...
Sure, yeah. So we have a question that is, has Microsoft announced an actual release date? I'm assuming you're referring to SharePoint 2016, and SharePoint 2016 is released to market. That's already there and available. You can even, rather than buying the full outright, you can download a trial version. I think you get like 30 days. So you can download a trial version of it, get that installed in one of your environments, play with it, make sure that things work and look the way you want it to. Is it going to provide enough benefit for you and give you a decent ROI for it? But the RTM version for SharePoint 2016 is available already.
It's been out for about 6 weeks.
I think that's about right. Yeah, I don't recall the exact release date, but it's been a little while. I think they even have, just like any other release of SharePoint, there's already hot fixes and packs out there to apply to it as well. So
yeah,
yep. One of the questions I know that's also come up as far as solutions as you move from one version to another. What happens if you don't bring over third-party solutions? So when part of the upgrade process, when you run, you can do like a test on your database to make sure everything's going to come across properly. If you have solutions that have not been installed in your new farm, you're going to see a number of errors presented when you connect your database. So how do you address that? How do you take care of some of those errors or issues or get rid of it? Because all that information is going to be stored in your content databases to know, hey, these are features, solutions that I'm expecting to find here. There's a tool in CodePlex, I believe it's called the Features Admin tool. So on CodePlex, if you did a search for that, you'll find an admin tool that allows you to basically you run it against your content database or one or more of your databases, and it will look and find what we call orphaned features. Then you can have those removed, and it'll clean up and get all that information out of your database. And it's fully sanctioned and supported by Microsoft. I know I always get nervous if somebody writes something that is going directly out and touching databases. Definitely not something I like to do, but this is one that's using the APIs, getting the information done properly, and it's fully sanctioned by Microsoft. So that could be definitely a tool to look at, if you're concerned about addressing some of those orphaned solutions, orphaned features in your world.
see. Have you heard if most third-party vendors' web part solutions are compatible with 2016? So I'll take a swing at this, and then I'll let you chime in, Goff, if you've got some perspective. So, so the architecture for building customizations within SharePoint has not changed between SharePoint 2013 and 2016. It used to be called the app model. Now it's called the add-in model. It's virtually the same, which was one of the benefits that Microsoft has been touting about the what used to be called the app model. However, most third-party solutions that are out there don't leverage the app model, or the add-in model as it's now called. They leverage what's called full trust web parts. Full trust web parts rely on server-side object model integration, and while it's still supported, full trust web parts are still supported in 2016, it's been deprecated. So you're going to have to test. And the reality is that in 2013, I don't really know that how much has changed the server-side object model between 2013 and 2016. We just haven't had enough of an opportunity to get in there and kick the tires. But I can tell you that most customizations, most third-party vendors are using full trust solutions, and those have to be tested. They're not nearly as loosely coupled as add-in model customizations, because those should work just fine. You got any additional perspective on that?
Not really, but it's going to depend on your third party, right? If you're going with one of the, I'll call them the big players like Bamboo Solutions or Lightning Conductor, right? Those companies typically, when they have their more popular tools, their calendar control or something like that that Bamboo has, they'll have the 2016. A lot of them are early adopters with Microsoft, so they've been working on the code long before even the betas and everything were being released. So they've been playing with versions, with the 2016 bits for a while, developing their tools. There's no way I can say that, yeah, all of their tools, they have a replacement. They're going to go with the more popular ones, what they have, and based upon their community feedback. So there's a good chance if you're using those more popular tools, there's a good chance that there's also a 2016 equivalent. But like Ted says, you'll need to do that research. What do you have and what have you got? Now you also need to do the research if you've done in-house customizations, right? So if your own team has created some different solutions, how are they going to run using, because of the new paradigm and the new coding and what's available? What do you need to do? How are you going to rewrite that code to get that into your new version of SharePoint, especially 2016? Ted had mentioned also, a piece that I wanted to throw out here. Ted had mentioned about the frequency of the updates that's going on, right? So definitely online, there's lots of changes that are, be coming out, and they're putting them out, and you get them. All you can do is maybe delay it a little while, but you don't have the option to say, no, I don't want this change or not, right? 2016, you've got that option, but one of the capabilities that's touted with 2016 is what they call the zero downtime updates, right? So because oftentimes updating your farm can take a long time. I've had, applying certain service packs, cumulative updates that, has caused downtime on my farms, for many, many hours. So they're making changes on how they're applying these updates, but read the fine print. When you start looking at the zero time updates, in order to take advantage of that and get that set up, you're going to need a duplicate farm. So they have to have the two farms in order to be able to leverage that zero downtime scenario for your end users. So please, if you are investigating that and looking at that and selling it, read the fine print, make sure you know what you've got so that you can include that as part of your planning. What is your architecture going to set up? How much hardware do you need? How all that's going to come to play. So don't let the zero downtime buzzword trip you up too bad. I think that's all I have. I don't see any additional questions.
That's it, Gail.
Okay, well, guys, thank you, Ted and Brian. Great presentation, as always. I just want to let everyone know that shortly after the webinar, you'll receive a request for you to evaluate today's webinar. Please take the time to complete. These are really important for us to continue to provide quality and timely educational opportunities to our members. Once again, thanks, Ted and Brian. We look forward to seeing everyone on future webinars. And as ILTA's Executive Director, Randy Mays, always says, tell a friend about ILTA. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.